Business news now. Stephen Carroll's with us here on set as Joe Biden prepares to host his climate summit later. He's been looking at the role of finance in climate change.
Yeah, that's right. It's one of the key pieces in the puzzle of tackling the climate emergency is following the money and making sure that money is shifted away from investing in fossil fuels into more sustainable forms of energy, something that was highlighted by the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on Wednesday ahead of that summit. Now, a report by a group of NGOs published last month found that if the world's top 60 banks invested $3.8 trillion in fossil fuels between 2016 and 2020. That peaked in 2019 at $824 billion worth of investments, fell slightly in 2020. The top investing banks, JP Morgan and Citi, Barclays was the biggest in Europe. The report also looked at banks that were taking action to bring down their carbon impact, and Italy's UniCredit scored best there. The top 5 French banks also had adopted policies to phase out coal financing. That was also recognised by this NGO. Just yesterday, we had 43 major banks sign a commitment to become carbon neutral by 2050. Still quite a long way off, but there's some movement there in the finance sector.
Let's keep trying to be positive, though. I mean, one area that's been going is green finance, isn't it, Stephen? What does that mean?
Well, these are investments that are destined for environmental purposes, so putting money into things like renewable energy or public transport. A common instrument that's used here are green bonds. This is borrowing on the financial markets for projects with an environmental purpose. Since 2007, according to the NGO, the Climate Bond Initiative, $1.2 trillion of green bonds have been issued. The biggest sector that money is going to is energy, followed by low carbon buildings and transport. Green bonds still only around 1% of the global bond market, though, although it did hit a record in 2020.
Now, next to losses at the bank Credit Suisse, it's linked to the collapse of a US hedge fund.
Bank reporting losses equivalent to around €230 million for the first 3 months of this year. Credit Suisse plunged into the red by the collapse of the Archegos fund last month. Credit Suisse had already warned that it was taking a financial hit of around €3.9 billion over that. But the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the bank's total exposure to Archegos actually totaled over €16 billion. And the top executives only became aware of the risk in the days leading up to the liquidation of the fund.
Let's come to France for this next story. The tourism industry here is really waiting news of when lockdown measures are going to be lifted. We talked about this just a moment ago.
That's right, and we know the 10-kilometre limit is going to go at the start of May, but we're still waiting for the date of when terraces will be able to reopen. And that's mean that seaside towns in the meantime are preparing for that influx of visitors that they're hoping will be able to return next month. If those restrictions are lifted, it would be a huge boost to their local economies, as Erin Ogunke now reports.
After weeks under lockdown, a return to normal is finally on the horizon.
Eh bien, comme vous le voyez, on vient juste d'installer les cabines. Donc ça, c'est vraiment le signal de l'ouverture de la saison. Ça annonce le début de saison estivale. Les personnes qui louent les cabines sont souvent des résidents secondaires qui viennent profiter du beau temps tous les week-ends.
From the evening of May 2nd, France will lift the restriction barring travel further than 10 kilometers from home. This campsite manager is counting on the several long weekends in May to rent out his 300 mobile homes. Before the pandemic, 80% of cabins would be full at this time of year.
Ça représente beaucoup de monde, à raison de en moyenne 4 personnes par mobil-home. Si on prend sur les 2 sites, 3 x 4, 12, 1200 personnes dans le camping, quoi. Donc 1200 personnes dans le camping, ce qui fait vivre tous les villages, les commerces aux alentours.
The manager of this seaside restaurant has already started preparing his patio, where he can fit 150 people.
On installe au fur et à mesure quand on a un petit creux, quoi, et on perd pas beaucoup de place parce qu'à la base, on a déjà des tables qui sont espacées.
But he still doesn't know exactly when he can reopen. The French government has suggested it will be sometime between the middle and the end of May. Either way, the spring holiday weekends are essential for employment. This restaurant alone could hire some 20 seasonal workers.
French carmaker Renault has been forced to cut production by tens of thousands of vehicles because of the global shortage of semiconductor microchips. Now, the company's chief financial officer is saying he expects supply to improve from July, but the shortages will continue to have an effect through the rest of the summer. Renault is in the middle of a major cost-cutting plan, which includes 15,000 job losses. Its sales down slightly in the first 3 months of 2021 compared to last year. But going back to that environmental story, it's expecting electric cars to make up a larger proportion of its sales this year, up from 10% in 2020 to up to 15% this year. That's a trend we're seeing across the market. Greater investment in electric cars, particularly in Europe.
At least there's one positive end to it. Thanks a lot, Stephen Carroll with Business on France 24.